Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be back here in London for the IFRS Conference. My first conference was last year, and we did some work. So, Andreas asked you a question about movies, so I'll ask, well, only a few of you, I think, were able to raise your hand. So maybe I will be more successful with an easier one. Whom of you in this audience have seen Charlie Chaplin's Gold Rush? Gold Rush. Only that. Interesting. Well, Gold Rush was released 98 years ago on the 26th of June. And that movie is close to a century old. That movie, in a poetic manner, epitomizes the limitations of ruthless economics of Klondike at the moment of the rush for gold. Ruthless from an economic, a social, a human, an environmental standpoint. In many ways, these were economics at the early start of last century. In many ways as well, market economy has then developed, and through its painful creative destruction process, has successfully brought technological changes and progress that lifted billions of humans out of poverty. For essentially the balance of last century. Interestingly, there was a first frontier that was, and maybe a final frontier, that was crossed about 30 years ago. 30 years ago when South Asian countries started to grow much faster, the tiger and the dragon economies of Southeast Asia, but also Japan before that, China from 1991, but also from 1989, in Europe, the Eastern Bloc of Europe, opening to market economy. So it was like the last frontier of global capital markets was going to be crossed in this decade of the 90s, 80s of last century. And interestingly, successfully so, today, the global capital markets are probably the most global economic reality that you can think of, virtually. And frankly, the initiative that probably started in the office of Paul Volcker at that point in time, wanting to protect US investors from the difficult accounting standards in Southeast Asia, that led to the creation of what is today the IFRS Foundation, a truly international financial reporting system, has played a huge role in allowing this last frontier to be crossed, allowing capital markets to flow in emerging countries and way beyond they had been in the Western world. Proving wrong in a way, an economist, which I feel is an incredible guy, Hernando de Soto, that wrote in the 90s a famous book that says The Mystery of Capital, Why Capitalism is Succeeding in the West and Failing Everywhere Else. It looks like the IFRS Foundation has helped to prove Hernando de Soto wrong. And yet, I'm standing with you here 1 year after last event here in London, very conscious with our colleagues at the IFRS Foundation that we are standing now at a much, much more difficult, challenging, essential frontier for the capital markets and for the future of accounting. Why and how could we think otherwise if you think of the nearly 500 ESG metrics, standards that have flourished over the last at least one decade, maybe more, if you think about initiatives as the GRI, for instance, that started 25 years ago, truly global today, to try to find a solution to express between companies, investors, but also other stakeholders, notions that economics didn't capture. Why did these people spend all that energy, effort, talent, money to develop those metrics if economics were doing what they needed to do? Simply because they didn't. Simply because this linear growth that economics had driven for the last nearly 100 years, where there was ample headroom to grow from one country to another, from a middle class to a lower middle class that would be elevated through the creative destruction process to middle class tomorrow. That we felt that we knew what tomorrow would be, that we had the magic equation that would solve the problem of humankind. And the fact is, in many ways, again, we did. But we are reaching limits. We are reaching these boundaries where uncertainty, as Andreas said, is growing and hitting the market, hitting the financial stability, the systemic stability of markets. And what is true for macro levels is true at the very micro level for companies. We learned, we as CEOs of complex organizations, large organizations, that growing in the current environment meant a lot more than what our financial statements could illuminate to our shareholders and our bankers. Simply take the example of nature. Economics do not recognize nature. Simply do not. The price we pay and what we account for in the financial statements is not what it took for nature to create oil. 55 million years. 55 million years. We consider that for free. What we pay for, what we account for, is the cost of exploring, of producing, transforming, distributing, selling that oil in the gas stations. But not a single penny for 55 million years of work by nature. And we know they're fossil. We know we won't be able to replace them one day. Maybe in 10 years, maybe in 100 years, but that will come to an end. We scarcely, barely pay the price of water. Yes, we pay the price of water as businesses, but the real value of water we don't pay. So a few of my colleagues, myself, we are based in Frankfurt, not far from the Rhine River. After the IFRS Conference last year, we had a heat wave in Europe that struck everywhere. The Rhine River level of water went down so much, by 80% at some places, that the navigation had to be stopped. The barges couldn't travel on the Rhine water. The largest river, 6 countries, 6,000 kilometers in Europe. Supply chains were disrupted for 3 weeks, and there are still 6 months after that, still reminiscences and consequences of those supply chain issues. At about the same period of time, during August in France, the French system of power plants had to be shut down on the Rhone River because the temperature of the river had reached its limit, that legally it could not be used anymore to cool down the nuclear power reactors. So the energy production of France was reduced by 10%. And these two events were only 6 weeks of heat wave. I run a company that was the largest almond user in North America, which was our largest market. All these almonds were grown in California. We needed a lot of water. We paid for that water. But we never paid for that water for the value that it may have the day there won't be enough water for everyone in California, in the Napa Valley. And we never paid for something that is unreplaceable, pollination by bees. And bees populations, you have to trust me on this one, are decreasing fast in California. We do not have a replacement solution. We do not. So with that, it's quite clear that regenerative agriculture, it's quite clear that investing in the true value of nature and how to protect these ecosystems that are essential for our economic lives, our ways of life as human beings, is critical for economics. The chairman of the largest insurance company in the world, 10 years ago, in 2015, said a world at plus 4 degrees cannot be insured. And you are all well placed to know in this room that insurance is a fundamental on how businesses work, economics work, people work in this world, where we have globalized that way of working. So that was in 2015. But I was in San Francisco the very day, about a month ago, the very day the first and the fourth largest Californian insurance companies announced that they would stop issuing any new home insurance package. Stop, because of the price and the cost of dealing with the extreme weather events, floods and fires in California. I'm not talking here about 2050. I'm not talking here about a small emerging country. I'm talking about 2023, 30th of May. I'm talking about California, which many predict to become the fourth largest economy in the world, overpassing Germany soon. Without home insurance, really? So that is what economics are failing to consider and to take into account. We cannot even apply a damage function to an asset that doesn't have a value. We cannot value something that is not even an asset. So there is no doubt why, over the last several years now, IOSCO, the Financial Stability Board, the G20, the G7, business leaders have gradually more and more looked at the IFRS Foundation and urged the IFRS Foundation to work, because this is the only organization that has the IASB, that indeed has an accounting system that is based on a robust, super robust due process, market-informed, answering to the market needs for the public goods of capital markets globally, that for 2 decades and something are now in place, as Andreas said earlier, in 140 plus jurisdictions. So who else could have been better placed to do that? And this is what we were tasked in doing, building on the shoulders of many, many people, organizations that were before us, the TCFD, the ISSB, the Integrated Reporting Council, the CDSB, to bring forward a language, an accounting-based language, not a discrete suite of ESG metrics and disclosures, which could be inconsistent, which can be competitive against each other, redundant, overlapping with gaps, a consistent, comprehensive language. We were standing till this morning on one side of that frontier. And we crossed it. We crossed it this morning with the launch of S1 and S2, our general requirement and our first climate standards. And I'm super happy to share that with you all here, the IFRS Foundation's global community, because you are at the very forefront of the stakeholders that have urged us to work on this, that has supported us in doing that, and that hopefully will benefit from the use of this language. I'd like a round of applause for all of you for your support in this journey. We could not have done that with your support, that's very clear. We won't be able to make it work and to expand beyond that frontier that we just crossed today without you all taking on that language and using it. But I want just to pause for one sentence of recognition as well of the incredible work that's been done by the IFRS Foundation teams, by the trust and the confidence that was placed by the trustees in our work, by the monitoring board of the foundation, my colleagues at the ISSB, including Sue here in this room, whom you will hear later on, our technical staff and the staff from the foundation. This is a moment, it's a short moment, but they deserve a huge round of applause for delivering what we are delivering in less than an 18-month period. Thank you for them. I will not go into the details of S1 and S2, but I'd like to briefly share with you why I'm talking about a language here. First of all, we borrowed significantly from our ISSB sister organization in the substance of what over decades they have developed. Our language is an accounting language. It is sustainability translated into an accounting language. So you will find in S1 in particular, the general requirements norm, a huge amount of notions that you're very familiar with, on purpose, because we want as much as possible that connection within the general purpose financial reporting with the financial statements and with the valuation. We are here to support the needs of the primary users of general purpose financial reports in the amount and the decision that they take on providing resources to entities, to companies, bankers, investors, and others. That's the reason why we exist, and for that we know which language they need to be using, and we're focusing on that. The second aspect of that language is we're opening the box and the horizons of the financial statements. We are opening that in scope and space by going into the entire value chains of companies, because this is where most of the sustainability risks and opportunities, I spoke about climate and nature, but that's true for social capital, for human capital as well, and many others, are in the value chains themselves. So we need to be observing and applying that language to a broader scope than what is required for the very strict and important limitations of the recognition in the financial statements. We're also opening another super important horizon, a time horizon. We are formally requiring entities to report in this whole value chain perspective on the short, mid, and long-term horizons. And we are connecting the dots with value creation and with the financial statements in two ways. The first is very, very early in S1, just after the first paragraph, which is about the objective, you will find a description of what we see as sustainability. We're not prescribing sustainability, but we're describing it. And what it says is that the value that a company creates for itself or its shareholders is inextricably linked to its business ecosystem. The civil society in which it operates, the human capital that it employs, the natural resources that it has to use and deploy. And therefore, to be able to manage the company in the long term and reach its objective over time, it's useful for companies to consider when they speak to their shareholders how they are managing those relationships and dependencies with natural capital, with social capital, with human capital. Not only these relationships and these dependencies, but also these impacts that they may have. Some of them may be financially material, may be material for an investment decisions. And so thinking about the development, the protection, the regeneration of those capitals is likely to be financially material, and therefore we want companies to check on that and then report if that is material. That's the first way we connect with value. Values in those capitals are not opposed. That is the same value that travels from one to the other. If I underinvest in regenerative agriculture, my soil will be degraded, and in the short term, I'll be able to capture value that may travel to dividends to my shareholders. But if I focus only on that, I won't have dividends 10 years from now because I won't have agriculture. So there may be an important trade-off to go from efficiency to resilience and to think about investing in regenerating agriculture to continue to build this inventory of value that is sitting there and that I want to protect for the longer-term ability that I have to serve dividends to shareholders. These are the questions that so many CEOs today, CFOs, are considering, and they needed a language. We're providing this, thanks in particular to the integrated reporting and thinking framework that we are embarking as soon as the second paragraph of S1. And the other important connection lies in the requirement for disclosure of the effects of sustainability risks and opportunities on current and anticipated effects of those risks and opportunities on the financial statements. I will stop here in my description. You have ample time and other opportunities this afternoon and in the backouts to discover more about S1 and S2. But I simply would like to say again that they have been developed with the unique due process, market-informed process, redeliberations, public redeliberations of the IFRS Foundation. We have added a jurisdictional working group with a number of jurisdictions actively engaged in standard setting in the areas of sustainability these days. We've increased the number of those jurisdictions. We've engaged regularly with IOSCO, with the Financial Stability Board, and that's why I would dare to say today that we confidently wait for the result of the very thorough and due process that IOSCO is starting now that we've published our standards on the endorsement of the standards, as they would be another game-changing moment in the ability of markets to benefit from the work that we have started here. I will conclude in saying that this is just the start. We've just crossed that frontier thanks to a huge collective effort. There is unlimited horizons. That language will be spoken in those horizons if you speak it. So I would encourage you to dare try and immediately test speaking that language. There will be a learning curve. We are very clear that capacity building will be front and center of our work for the next several months and probably several years, working with everyone in this room and beyond to ensure that this language is effectively used. And I hope that by the 26th of June 2025, in 2 years from now, when the first reports of S1 and S2 will start coming out of the jurisdictions, the companies that would have been using it from its effective date in 24, I would hope by that date would mark the 100-year anniversary of Gold Rush of Charlie Chaplin. We would definitely have departed from this past economics. Thank you. I count on you.
What do you expect me to do? I can't hear you. I'm fine. See you, my friends.